Celtics Stuff Live.
Welcome to Celtics Stuff Live on the CLNS Media Network, the leading online provider of audio and video coverage for your Boston Celtics. And John, let's just start it off in the rightest of ways, which is to wish our good friend Mike Gorman a happy 70th birthday. I know they mentioned it on the broadcast the other night, and then obviously Kyle Draper fills in for the Indiana game, and we'll talk about Kyle in a second. But, you know, Mike has been a longtime good friend of the show, a supporter, somebody who felt like we were early to this podcasting project a long time ago, and certainly we were, John. Obviously now it's everywhere and quite popularized, but I will just say, nobody, maybe more than Mike Gorman, supported our early efforts. I know it's been a while since we had him on the show. Certainly we should reach out to him when, in the next couple of weeks or over the course of the season. We've got to fit in a few interviews. I know that's not really our format anymore, but Mike is a huge friend, and he's been a great supporter, and it's hard to believe he's 70, and the work that he's done over all these years, the various versions of what is now CSN Boston, CSNBC, sorry, is now
NBC Boston, actually.
NBC Boston, there we go. See, that's what you get from an out-of-market guy. But then, I mean, what was it, Sports Channel at one time? I can't even remember all that. So, all I'm saying is he's been doing it a long time, and he does it pretty well, and it's until somebody else steps into the booth that you remember just how good and how talented Mike Gorman is. And, I remember when we get to the Kyle stuff, I remember he came on about a year and a half ago to talk about, during our off-season interview series, just the difficulties of that job and some things that he learned in his early career. So we'll revisit, some of that as we talk about it. But, probably you want to say a couple of nice things about Mike as well.
Just a couple. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, outside of you and me and JB, there probably wasn't a bigger supporter of what we were doing. I include probably Jeff Clark in that. I think Jeff Clark from Celtics Blog was a huge supporter of ours in the early going.
Absolutely, he was.
But probably outside Jeff, I mean, if there's a five, I think the fifth member of our dream team is probably, Mike Gorman, and willing to come on the show and giving us credibility when a time when we didn't deserve it, probably. And he was not only a big supporter of ours, but actually was the only reason I've told the story often. The first time the three of us actually met, we'd done the show for well over a year at that point, if not a year and a half, and we hadn't met in person, and it wouldn't have happened without Mike. So Mike literally brought us we did the show together. So we brought ourselves together, but to literally put us in the same room, it took Mike Gorman. So, that's a little bit of, history there. But no, look, it's kind of funny because you listen to a lot of the interviews Mike does, and we've talked with him a lot. And he always has kind of a bit of a detachment from those early Celtics years when you and I kind of got hooked, the Bird era. And for me, I think of Mike Gorman and the Boston Celtics as just synonymous. Big East as well, and certainly as a college basketball fan, I watched a lot of those games going back to the 80s when the Big East was just the end-all be-all. Probably only second to what was going on in the NBA. And Mike was really at the heart of both of those things. But as we talk to him now and talking about those kind of 1980s, the Bird era, and then in the 90s, when he only did the home games, there's a detachment there. And it's kind of interesting because, for us, he's just so synonymous. I mean, for 40 years almost, he is, the Boston Celtics. Watching a Boston Celtics broadcast is as much about Mike Gorman as it is the Shamrocks and the Boston Garden and the parquet floor. Mike Gorman is a part of, the history that is a part of that. And it's amazing for a guy who started out growing up in Dorchester, crawling up the back staircase to get into to sneak into the games. And he's as much a part of it as Tommy Heinsohn is, a guy who, obviously is synonymous with the franchise for, 60 plus years now. It's one of the coolest things in the world is when my kids and your daughters and, we did this before our kids were born. And now my son, my oldest is 11, we watch a game and Mike's on the screen. I'm like, oh yeah, there's Mike, and my kids are like, yeah, Mike Gorman, and it's like, whoa, like and he's just such an icon in this area. And, not only is he as a great broadcaster and great at telling a story and letting the story breathe, but he's probably even better off the air. He's better as just the interpersonal relationship.
He's a better human being. Just
love the guy.
Straight up. Yeah, he's a great human being. And there's just so many things you could say about him. And we've said them many times over the years. Yeah. So happy 70th birthday to you. Really a legend and inspiration to John and I. And then obviously lending your support. So happy birthday, Mike. Let's talk about his replacement for the Indiana game, Kyle Draper. You want to do a little review of Kyle's performance, because it is shocking to hear a different voice on TV. I know it's happened before, right? It happened with, if you remember, Gary Tangway stepped in, and I don't think we gave Gary rave reviews. I think I sense we're going to take it a little bit easier on Kyle. He had to settle in. I'll tell you, my initial impression was that at the outset of the game, he was trying to be a little bit more Sean Grandy than Mike Gorman. And if you do remember back in the day, but back in the off-season interview series when I spoke with Mike, one of the things he said was that he had to learn how, over the years, that they were already watching the game. So he didn't need to describe it like you might on radio. And he even said, Sean Grandy's got a much harder job in many respects because his voice has to be your eyes. And in television, that's not the case. And Mike said sitting back a little bit and letting the viewer fill in the gaps with their eyes and not just talking over every single play was a talent. And so at first I got the sense Kyle was not really following that, but he corrected quickly, I will say. And there was some banter between him and Scal. I'll let you kind of give your thoughts before we talk about that. But there was some banter between him and Scal that I thought got under Scal's skin for a minute there too. I mean, he didn't make mention of it, but you could almost hear it in the silence that ensued for a minute from Scal. But just give your overall take on Kyle's job.
I think that the big thing that I thought, absolutely, I'd agree with you. In the early going, there was nerves. There was definitely trying to get too much in, and eventually he settled into just sitting down, watching the game with a guy he knows and describing the action. You know what I mean? It was like he tried to put on an air about him, and then he just kind of settled back and let Kyle be Kyle. And I think that's why I like the way Mike does it. Is you don't know.
It feels like you're sitting on the couch next to the guy just watching the game. Absolutely.
And that's what Mike's great at. Is he's just, and he'll give you a little taste of it, but he's not going to, go, kind of talking head on you. And I thought that was the nice thing that Kyle does. That sometimes Kyle's job when he's in the studio, sometimes is to play devil's advocate, to kind of push back on Tommy, push back on Scal. And he did that, but it wasn't in the same vein, in the same way. He used a different skill set. I was very impressed. I mean, as you said, we were not kind when Gary had to fill in for Mike a couple of years back.
What was his choice word? Because I know Kyle kind of relied on why not? That is hilarious. All right, so
why not?
Kyle did bang, bang, bang. And I remember talking to Gary. He came on as a guest, and we mentioned that, and we kind of teased him a little bit about that night. And when he filled in, and he even said, not really my forte necessarily, but that he had made a point of there needs to be a catchphrase. You have to have something that you say. And so he went with why not. And, obviously he got shredded for it. Now, Kyle went with bang, bang, bang versus Mike's got it, which, Mike's that's great. He's got it down. He nailed. Now, am I in love with bang, bang, bang? No, I'm not in love with it, but it didn't annoy me. I know there were some people that I saw were kind of like, that was kind of annoying. But the reason it didn't annoy me was twofold. One, he didn't say it like the way that Gary overdid the why not. Gary was so over the top with the why not. I felt like Kyle's bang, bang, bang was still, kind of like in the flow. Still wouldn't go with bang, 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 but it did annoy me because he also not only did he not go over the top when he said bang, 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 but he also didn't overuse it. It wasn't like every good play he was bang, bang, bang. So.
Well, yeah, and let me just say this. The older members of the listening audience, all five of you, and Justin and I, look, bang, that's Johnny Most right there, that's burn from the corner, bang. That's what that is. And so, I don't know if that was intentional on Kyle's part. I'd love to know if he was trying to kind of bring that back. And it didn't hit me until you said it, honestly, right now, because I just heard it. I'm like, okay, that's his thing. And for whatever, it flowed naturally. That was the nice thing about his broadcast. It just kind of happened, and it wasn't like fits and starts, which is the way.
Yeah, he's genuine. He's genuine. I mean, to your point,
was genuine.
Even the character he has to play in studio isn't like
different.
The character that Gary Tanguay feels like he has to play in studio.
Absolutely. Right. And so he was able to kind of back off of that, just be him and Scal kind of kind of matching wits a bit, which was good stuff. But I think the other thing about that, like I said, if he's bringing back bang, that's kind of a funny story too with Mike, because Mike, that was the one thing that Johnny Most told him, is that you gotta have a catchphrase, you gotta have something. And he says, well, mine's, and of course Mike knew this, having, been a follower of the team for decades at that point. Said, obviously he can't do bang. So he, got it was his thing. And obviously that's his. So, and I don't know what the conversation, we'd love to know how that if there was some interplay there about what to use or how to use it. But I think it's ingenious. If it is purposeful, all the more credit to Kyle. But I think even more credit goes to him just for the simple fact of throwing it in there, making it his own thing, and not having it be a distraction. So you couldn't, really enjoy the rest of the game. It is on a Saturday night, there's really on the back end of a back-to-back. What better way for somebody to kind of step into this role is kind of the fill-in for Mike.
Yep, absolutely. I thought Kyle did. You know what? We'll give him a 7/8, and he didn't fall into the trap that many people do, where it's their first opportunity and then they make it about them because they're trying to make a point. Hey, I'm on the scene, and they didn't do that. So. Right. I don't know if we want to get into the Scal stuff. Maybe I'll just ask you, did you notice the same thing when Kyle was kind of fooling around with him about, their little one-on-one matchup and playing in the, not the Y League, but you know what I mean, just playing around and all that. Did you notice that Scal got a little, offended on a couple of occasions?
I think, he has to wear that I'm not a good NBA player to such a degree, but when somebody who is not of that caliber, he does, the first stands up on the back of Scal's neck. You know what I'm saying? That's not something he's gonna put up with, No, I did notice that. That's good. I love it.
They have good chemistry, so it'll just be interesting to see how that kind of plays out over time. But it was funny. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it and create unnecessary drama or bore listeners, but I did notice it. And Scal did a good job of not, letting it show too much, but if you were really paying attention and listening to the two, you could kind of hear how that happened. So it was very interesting.
Well, and we should give Scal credit too, because it's one thing to be the guy. Mike has a good setup where he's 50%, he's kind of working with both. And so he's been able to kind of make it work with both guys. For Scal to be able to jump in, and now he's got to be the veteran guy effectively on the team. I thought he did a great job. And just to put a bow on the whole thing, I'm a very hard grader when it comes to this. I do not, Mike Gorman is the gold standard, and so for someone else to walk into that TV job and to step into it and me not spend this entire show railing on them, it probably deserves a 10 out of 10, to be honest, rather than a 7 or 8. But I think he did a fine job, and that's I'm not saying that's saying something coming from me, noted media critic, but I would not be afraid to rip it.
It is the fact that the fact that game, which was a very fun game, and we're going to talk about it in just a second, but the fact that game on Twitter didn't become about Kyle and Scal tells you that, because we're a critical bunch, and we've all been attuned to Mike and Tommy. So there you go. And even Scal, to your point about Kyle, has has fared quite well, considering he's been following in Tommy's footsteps, as you know, on those away games, etc. So, hats off to both of them. You can follow the Celtics Stuff Live. You can follow the Celtics Stuff Live, John, on Twitter at CSL_tweet live. You can follow it's the Celtics Stuff Live now.
Oh, I like that.
In front. You can follow the Celtics Stuff Live.
We're important.
You can follow me at CSL_Justin. John is at CSL_Duke. The entire CLNS Media Network at CLNS Media. The Facebook page, Facebook.com/CLNS fans. And download the CLNS Media app for iOS and Android. Simply search CLNS Media in your app marketplace. And finally, the YouTube channel, YouTube.com/CLNS Media for high definition, full length locker room interviews and the Garden Report. So, John, we didn't have a show last week due to Thanksgiving holiday and just taking some time with the families. So during that, there was a rather large streak that was broken. I thought the letdown game was going to be Dallas. Turns out it was Miami. And then they bounce back with a home and away and get right on the saddle. Totally blow them out on the first at home, giving themselves some rest to then play this game against Indiana. And you know, there were a couple of faces. You want to talk about depth. We thought depth was going to be an issue. So, second game of a home and away. It's the away game. They're on the road. Thank goodness for the blowout the night before. But they're missing Marcus Morris and Jaylen Brown. Marcus Smart goes into the starting lineup, and yet they still tag on another win. So anybody who thought that loss to Miami breaking the streak was finally showing the fool's gold that is the Boston Celtics, I think that home and away back-to-back just put that all to rest and said, nope, they're here for real.
Yeah, well, you know, and the one thing that the takeaway from the Miami game to me was, as you said, I think the Dallas game took a lot out of them. Every game that they play against Dallas, and they play against Carlisle, specifically, that dude is a wizard, man. I don't care what he does. I don't care who he's coaching. He could be coaching, a third grade, travel team, and they go up against the Celtics. Dude's going to find a way to get something going. He is amazing. So when they were going to Dallas, that was the game, as you said, that was the game we were concerned with. If we had done a show, we would have spent the whole time probably praising Dallas. But then they take that and they go on and really do well in a couple of different instances. I thought the Miami game was really them being tired. I thought there was fatigue. I know Brad's saying there's no fatigue. I'm not buying that. I think there is fatigue. I don't know if it's fatigue from the streak, but just fatigue in general. And then to come back from that, and I thought it was the first game too, where they had a target on their back. And everyone in that arena in Miami was gunning for the Boston Celtics. And that was an unfamiliar place to be. And I thought that they didn't respond well to that. They weren't perfect. They obviously got down, which is what they do. And they fought back, which is what they do. And it wasn't enough because they didn't play perfect basketball, which they had been able to do in coming back in those bigger deficits. Then fast forward here to Saturday night's game in Indiana. I thought there was that same energy going through the first half of that game. Indiana really was interested in taking it to the Celtics. There was a crowd that was not fully capacity, but certainly well stocked crowd that was pretty amped to beat the Celtics. And they too put a target on the Celtics back.
And they had a streak going, so they had something that they were kind of trying to ride.
They did.
And they've got the chip on their shoulder from the Paul George trade, and Oladipo wasn't able to play in that game, correct? That's why.
No, they were under gun.
Both teams were under gun. So I'm almost interested to see how that will play out again in a future matchup with both teams being healthy. But it was interesting to see Lance Stevenson just try to take over that game offensively. There was a super fun game. And one of the things I noticed, at least in the early on, that I need to pay a little bit more closer attention to, I think it was because Marcus Smart was in the starting lineup instead of Jaylen Brown that it really stood out to me. But they're constantly rotating a double. Have they been doing that all season and I just wasn't paying attention? Or did they legitimately do that a lot more at the beginning of that Indiana game?
Yeah, I think that was a wrinkle that Nate McMillan was kind of throwing at him. I hadn't seen a lot of. They were doing more doubles of Kyrie certainly early on,
No, I mean
but
vice
then
versa. I'm talking about the Celtics.
the Celtics throwing a double.
They were
Something. No, I
throwing a
hadn't.
lot of doubles, no matter who the ball handler
Yeah,
was. And early
no, I
on,
didn't
it was
notice
still.
that.
And the reason I noticed is I think Jalen more or less plays like free safety. You know what I mean? In shadows, and then will come up and challenge. Whereas in this game, I felt like they were always throwing that second body. And when the ball started to rotate from side to side with Indiana, that the players would just then shift their double to the middle and then to the right and then back all the way around to the left. And it was just, that to me is the defensive versatility that we've talked about by having all of these players that are long and athletic, but they were downmanned or undermanned in that game. And so to see that, I think it was just the personnel that made it stand out. Maybe they did it a little bit more aggressively or, put the doubles up a little bit more in their mug. I didn't see it as much in the second half as it stood out obvious to me in the first half, but I thought it was interesting. And the thought did occur to me that there was something about the way Jalen engaged in the defense that way that made it not quite as obvious as it was.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was really, it was a matchup with personnel and seeing, outside of, Lance and Collison really not having a lot of ball handlers out there. So really trying to push it into a bad matchup where, you had the double, and as long as you're not doubling off somebody who can't shoot, which Collison isn't a good shooter, Lance is a very streaky shooter, Bogdanovich obviously a good shooter, Turner a good shooter, you had a little bit more space you could give a guy like Thad Young. Maybe that was just personnel based. I'm not sure. I thought
because they had Tyson Smart in the starting lineup, and that
right.
was a total wrinkle. I think a lot of people expected Baines, and when I was watching the beginning, I thought, well, I get it. The bench needed a little bit of help. Maybe the bench needed that veteran presence, but I'm not sure that that's the case actually.
No, yeah, I think Tice was the right idea. I mean, because you got the length that in terms of a matchup with Thad, you got the length, but you've also got the quickness, and you're not going to take an L on that because, you're giving up something. I mean, Tice is going to be able to stay with Thad Young and keep that matchup to a minimum. And then, basically your Horford, going with Turner, that it kind of even up on both sides. So
did you notice Tice totally, when there was a play where he was going up to dunk. I think Kyrie set it up. It was either Kyrie or Smart. Mm-hmm. And they set it up, and it was looking really good, and he got blocked by Thaddeus Young. Yeah. And it was so obvious that if he had just gone to the left hand and let the rim be his protector, that he could have laid that off the glass. And instead he went up aggressive and got blocked. And I thought, that's not a play that you usually see a Euro make, right? The Euro guys are usually the ones that are going to let it lay up off the glass and do that kind of smart, savvy thing. I thought that's interesting from a Euro. I would have expected to lay in off the glass.
But maybe it's because there aren't many guys in EuroLeague balls that can elevate like Thad Young did too. Maybe he's the guy who's able to do those quick twitch maneuvers, and he's not used to somebody, coming over to help and being able to elevate and get up and meet him at the rim, quite like that. That's the only thing I could think of,
That's probably a good thought.
Gotta be, yeah. So
it's a learning experience for Tice. I think he'll make the adjustment,
yes.
and it's not really a big deal. And it's a very light criticism because I think we've gotten a lot more out of Tice than we thought we would, and legitimately he deserved an opportunity to start. I don't think he answered the call the same way that Marcus Smart did, but we're gonna do a commercial before we talk about Smart, so that's how we'll lead into the second half. But I want to add in one other thing before we do talk about our sponsor, is the fact that I remember at the very beginning of the season, I was getting questions about, do you think Nader is going to get an opportunity? I think he's in the rotation. He should get minutes. And I said, I really just don't think we're going to see Nader get a lot of minutes this season unless we really have an issue with injuries. And certainly that injury that kicked off the year made me think, oh, he might get some spot minutes. But boy, does he ever look like a recurrence of James Young and Jordan Mickey out there. I just am like, what? And it's unfortunate. I don't think he has this stuff. I'll be honest with you, John. It's a nice depth guy, great story, light up the D-League, but I don't think he's going to be. I mean, already Semi Ojeleye looks far more ready to be at this level.
Well, we saw Nader in Summer League 2 years ago, just as Mickey had, lighted up and really parlayed that into a Red Claws deal, and then what ended up being a 4-year deal that he signed. I mean, obviously not all that's guaranteed, but a 4-year deal that he signed here this summer. So I think Nader, I'd love to say that he's getting his opportunities and should be taking advantage of his opportunities, and he's not able to do that right now. I'd love to see him get a chance to go back down to Maine. I don't know that they can do that with the depth they have, but I'd like to see him try to get some confidence. I think clearly it's a confidence issue. When he played free and easy 2 years ago in Summer League, he was a monster. I mean, he could do everything. He's having a hard time right now with everything. Everything is going wrong. And that just feels like
How about that one play when he kind of was coming in from the left side and just got swallowed up, and it was so obvious he should have kicked the ball out and had opportunity to kick it out and thought he was going to make like this Lance Stevenson style move that just was not happening.
No, there's a lot of Nader hate on the Twitter. And look, he's not playing well right now, but the guy I saw play in Summer League is a guy they need. So if he can tap into that, if he can start to feel good about what he's doing, if something can click for him, it'll work. I see this happen so often. You and I have talked about it a lot on this show in the past. We look at Avery Bradley, his first year here, and we were talking about, is he a point guard? Is he not a point guard? How does he crack? How does he become a player? And eventually they found something he was good at in harassing the ball carrier. And before you know it, that triggered into something else, and then he became a complete player. And we see him, against the Detroit Pistons here on Monday night. We're going to see a completely different guy than the guy we saw, not really able to even look like a basketball player. So, I don't think it's a question whether he can or can't. It's a question whether he's going to take the opportunities he has and turn them into something. And in Nader, and I think he can, but he's the only one that can do it. And so it's a mental thing. I think he'll get there. There's a lot of guys who are probably less talented than him and are playing fine because they figured out how to make themselves successful. He's going to do the same thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about Marcus Smart. But first, listen up, Hoops fans. Basketball season, as you know, is back and underway. We're a quarter of the way through. And now that your favorite hardwood heroes have returned to action, it's time for you to put your fantasy knowledge to the test and win huge cash prizes every night playing one-day fantasy basketball at DraftKings.com. At DraftKings, there are so many ways to play. Choose from public contests with huge cash prizes or private contests where you can compete against your friends. They've even got bigger and casual contests where you'll play against people of similar skill level. The best part, you get to draft a new team each and every single day, and drafting is arguably the best part of fantasy. The only thing better, winning cash doing it. Just ask Dan from St. Louis or Jeremy from Austin. They both turned a $3 entry into $1,000. Huge cash prizes and bragging rights await only at DraftKings. And if as a loyal listener of this show, you use the code CLNS at DraftKings.com, free with your first deposit for your share of $10,000 in total prizes. That's tonight. Don't wait. Use code CLNS at DraftKings.com now to choose your lineup, and you can seriously cash in. That's code CLNS at DraftKings.com. The game inside the game. Minimum $5 deposit required. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for details. John, let's talk about Marcus Smart. I'm excited because I like seeing him in the starting lineup. I know one game of poise and shooting confidence does not a player make, and you and I are maybe not really objective in being in his camp at all times, unwaveringly. But I do think he's unabashed. He takes a lot of the ball handling pressure off of Kyrie as well, which I think helps Kyrie save that energy for all of those smooth, slick, just silky way. I just don't understand the head fakes to pumps, the change in direction or tempo to be able to find his way to the rim. And I think having somebody like Marcus at the 2, now that Hayward is injured, gives him a little bit of relief so that he's got plenty left in the tank to close out games, much in a similar fashion to Isaiah Thomas last year, except Isaiah didn't have the help. I'm almost thinking he might need to stay there. And I know at the beginning of the year, I was arguing against that and saying they needed a guy that was going to be on the bench, that was going to be able to set up the offense for the bench units. But the bench has been a surprise to me. And Terry Rozier has absolutely provided instant offense, lights out from beyond the arc. I think now is the time where we can say, you know what, Marcus can move into that starting lineup. I'd actually rather see Marcus Morris in on that second unit because he's actually shown a propensity to get those kinds of buckets, those hard to get buckets. And I think that whatever dip they have in playmaking ability or, you know, having more of a floor general out there to set up the offense, I think it's actually better to have Morris on that bench unit. So I'd almost like to see Smart and Brown and Tatum and Horford and along with Kyrie. I think that would be probably the ideal way to move forward in my mind. I know it'll always be based on matchups, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, and have basically Brown being more of a three in that case, you know. Well, I think that's their best lineup overall. I mean, I think there's times Morris makes sense in that group instead of maybe one of those guys. There's times when Baines makes more sense in that group, but I think consistently, I think that's their best five, truthfully. I think that's been their closing lineup on a lot of nights too.
The defense, the game-winning plays. I just think, and really it doesn't impact their ability to switch at all. I think, as a matter of fact, when they do switch, it throws a different look at the offensive player when they do get Marcus Smart instead of a Jaylen Brown as the defender.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of their best lineup, I'd agree. I'm not sure if I would make that switch permanent. I think I'd prefer Smart probably as the sixth man. The challenge with Marcus, I think, is really, I think if you pull him more with with that type of lineup, who is going to be doing the playmaking in the second unit? And I really don't see that Terry's that guy. I don't think Terry's kind of figured that part of his game out yet.
I agree with that, but similar to those rotations, Horford's out there a lot with them. And so much of the offense can run through them. Larkin, if you're really struggling.
Yeah.
But it's the defense that this team has exhibited across the board from top to bottom that has really wound up. I mean, look at the way that second unit, was it the first night of the back-to-back or was it India? It was the first night of the back-to-back. Look at the way that second unit just totally hunkered down in the third quarter. And, or maybe that was Indiana. I'm getting confused, but the second unit, the way that they've locked down on defense it's allowed them to go through some of those scoring droughts without giving up the lead.
Yeah. Well, I think the offense is probably where my focus is right now. I think that's the Achilles heel right now, this team. I think just about any lineup they're going to throw out there is going to be good defensively, honestly. I feel like unlocking a guy like Smart in a game against the Pacers, when they really needed that guy, they needed him to step up. And thankfully we've been able to have Rozier kind of step up in his shooting. Other than the first few games, he had really kind of struggled a little bit. So it was kind of difficult to see how they were going to progress as a second unit. And, even Ojale was making some shots against the Pacers. So it kind of opened up all those guys, kind of opened up everything. But to me, how do you unlock Smart? How do you get Smart's offense going? He's always going to be the fifth or sixth, option. I'm not saying in a team sense on the court, but you don't want to go through him. He is your worst shooter, but you need him to shoot. And we had a lot of people last week saying, well, he shouldn't be shooting. No, he has to shoot. They need him to be a threat. Even if he's 2 for 11 from three, as he was last week, I think the Dallas game perhaps. You have to have him shoot that. You have to have him be a threat. I mean, we remember the days when Rondo was out there and he wouldn't shoot the ball in those instances, and it gummed up the entire offense. You have to take the shot. You have to make him a threat. The trick is, I think, to your point, what's the best way to unlock him? Do you unlock him by having a lot of guys who could score on the floor with him, kind of as which would be in that kind of starting unit? Or would he unlock better maybe in that second unit, whereas he's doing more of the playmaking, maybe more of the ball handling, but there maybe not be as much space for him to work? I feel like
I
offensively
think he
he might
needs
be
the
better with that first
space.
unit.
Yeah,
But
he needs that
the
space,
second
and
unit,
because part of it's the passing, right? His ability, like look at how many times he fed Tice and Baines on drives to the rim, and he was like a little looping pass over the defender that would just land in their hands, and then they would just lay it right in. It's so simple, so easy. He's got real, not only court vision, but he's got a great sense of timing. And I think that that's where he can take so much off of Kyrie Irving, let Kyrie work off the ball, maybe even give more effort on defense. And I think we have seen and have acknowledged on this show previously the uptick in defensive commitment and ability on Kyrie's part. But I think that helps so much, because outside of the two-man game with Horford, how much reprieve does Kyrie really get with the ball handling? Nobody else really sets up the offense. As great as, Tatum is with the ball in his hands, it's typically more of an ISO kind of scenario. And that doesn't really, that's not going to present itself every time down the floor. I mean, Tatum has been really lights out. Probably the worst game he's played on the season was Indiana. He wasn't quite finishing as much, and there were some missteps there, but he's been incredible, and really his ability to get around guys with that long first step, and then his hands. He gets that ball up by the rim to lay off the glass. It's amazing what he's been able to do, and they need to exploit that more. And I think Smart having the ball in his hands helps that too, because they can run that two-man game with Horford and Kyrie, but then they can show a completely different look where Smart's trying to feed some of the bigs, and then at the same time you could set up Jalen and Tatum to try and attack and just go right up the gut, and I just think that gives them so many different looks.
I think you're exactly right. I think that's the evolution, and we talked about it a month ago, I think, on the show, is like, how do you get more into Tatum's hands? Like, every game I watch and I want to see more. I want to see them give more to him, give more opportunities, because he's basically catch and shoot and, or driving closeouts. His offense right now, what they ask him to do is basically the same package they were giving Jay Crowder, and obviously he is a much more accomplished offensive player than that. I'd like to see them give him more to do. And maybe a move of having more Smart minutes with that starting unit. And they're already pulling Tatum first, but I feel like when he's going in, they're not really looking for him in that second unit enough. I'd like to see them really put more on his shoulders. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why they've chosen not to do that. But to me, that's where this team's success could best, basically take, this is crazy to say, basically take what you were going to have Hayward do with that second unit and give him some of those responsibilities. I think he has more help around him than we thought Hayward was going to have, but I think that's exactly the type of situation we'd like to see, is put him in that second unit, but give him the keys, because right now it feels like they put him in that spot, but I don't feel like the offense is being run to take advantage of those things.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't think that they developed the offense that way. They're kind of learning along the way. I don't think that this team expected Tatum to be able to contribute so much on offense, to be honest with you. Yeah. And I don't think that they intended on putting that on him. I think they figured when he's out there with the second unit, or maybe even initially they thought he would be to start the year, especially with the Hayward being healthy, that he would get some spot starts. But I don't think they thought he was going to just anchor into that unit with Jalen the way that those two have. I think we all knew, if we really thought about it closely, that Jalen was going to be in the starting lineup and not Marcus Smart. But if they did put him in the lineup, meaning both Smart and Jalen, that would mean a kind of a smaller lineup, and they'd shift down a little bit. I don't think that they thought Tatum would be in there the way that he is. And a lot of that is probably due to the Hayward injury, but I think they would have played him at the 4, if not the 3 anyhow. And even Hayward could have played a little bit at the 4 in those smaller lineups. So I think it's evolving, and I think that's, again, why I say Smart, because I just think having another playmaker out there diversifies it. They're so good at that two-man game between Horford and Kyrie that they are going to be dangerous in the playoffs. That's exactly the kind of offense that you need to be able to run in the postseason while everybody else is supplying, really strong defense. But on top of that, the other thing that I'll say is that they still need to have other creative ways to generate offense. And if they got stuck in that two-man game, I can see the more experienced postseason teams being able to shut that down a little bit. I mean, Kyrie is incredible. The things that he's doing is amazing. And the playoff format where you get a break off in between every game will certainly be conducive to him pulling it off. But I also think it's going to take its toll. And I don't think it's going to be as easy for him when they get into the postseason. So that's where I see the advantage of having like Smart and Tatum out on the floor. Give Tatum more responsibility, build up his confidence, and then get Marcus out there to help make sure that that offense keeps flowing and that they can swing it to the other side real easily. And if you want a cure of the offense, more playmaking, one of the stats that came out, I think it was Jay King had it in his write-up, and maybe it was after the Orlando game on Friday. I can't remember exactly when, but he had asked Brad Stevens about the passing statistics because they really weren't as high as they were last year, which actually seems surprising to me because I felt like this year the offense was much more versatile and that they were kind of sharing the load instead of just putting it all on Isaiah's lap. And yet, statistically, this team doesn't move the ball as much. So if that is something that is correlated with the downtick in offense, like you said, that's what you're mostly concerned about, John, then I would think having somebody who can facilitate, who can pass, who has that great sense of timing, and who doesn't really need to shoot the ball as far as like what Marcus needs to be effective, I can only see that as positive for this starting unit in the offense.
I think he's going to have to make those shots, the type of shots he was making last night to be able to play those minutes, I think, in the playoffs. I think that he is, certainly we've seen that he knows how to, impact a game without scoring. But, as we saw against, the Bulls last year, you need as many shooters sometimes in the playoffs as you could possibly get. So if he's able to shoot, not at that level. 7 from 8 is probably unrealistic for Marcus. But if he's shooting, if he's getting 4 to 8, if he's shooting half of those shots to go down, that's all they need. They just need him to be a threat out there. They need him to be able to, to get a couple buckets, in a quarter, and that kind of, holds the dogs off a little bit and causes them to be able to do some other things with Kyrie on the floor.
With all those other players, it might open up more consistent spots where he gets open versus being on the second unit where he's trying to create all the time. That could really help, that he just finds 2 or 3 key areas that he shoots from consistently in the way that teams generally play defense against them, in the way that the offense is usually going to run when he's in there with the starters. I mean, I can just see it simplifying and having some real positive benefits for him that way too.
No, I think that's a great call. I think you're right. That there is some that higher level of basketball IQ around him really just helps him to find his spots a little bit better. I think that the biggest thing for him though is just finding his own kind of sense of when to shoot, when to drive, those are the things that he's got to figure out as a player, just in the NBA. And it's just, that's been a little bit of a slower, adjustment period for him. So hopefully this is going to be a season where he can find that now around with more accomplished players around him, where he'll finally be able to figure that out, no matter who he's sharing the floor with, when to be able to be that guy who's driving to the line and driving to the basket to get to the line, and when really he needs to be a shooter out there and causing the defense to have to pay when he's shooting it, especially when the shot clock's dying down, because that's when he's most dangerous.
That is, there's no doubt, and he's always willing to hoist it up.
Absolutely.
All right, so we got a great set of games on tap this week. We've got to wrap the show, but your Boston Celtics are in first place. Who'd have thought? And especially the depth. It's really remarkable. Brad Stevens has really put something together here on the floor, and Danny Ainge has drafted remarkably. What a turnaround, and what a surprise. What a pleasant surprise. So we'll be back in a week. I hope everybody is enjoying this beginning to the holiday season. It's a nice time of year. I hope everybody enjoys it with family and friends. And this broadcast will be available on demand on the CLNS Media mobile app. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at CSL_Justin and at CSL_John. _Duke. A heartfelt thank you to everybody for tuning in. And remember that you can help support the show by subscribing to Celtics Stuff Live on iTunes and Stitcher. We'd love it if you gave us a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. And for staff writer Samuel Elias, executive producer Larry H. Russell, the founder of CLNS Media, Nick Gelso, and my co-host John Duke, I'm Justin Poulin. Thank you for listening to another edition of Celtics Stuff Live.
Celtics Stuff Live.